This is going to be a brief look at free speech, and in particular at the question of what sociolinguistics can contribute to debates about free speech. The meaning of free speech is something that's always going to be up for discussion in liberal democracies. But for various reasons, we're going through a period of history where it's particularly contested. So that's one prompt for the question, but there's another one as well. Free speech is, purportedly, about speech, but the discipline which concentrates on speech, sociolinguistics, hasn't, as far as I know, taken much of an interest in the topic. Theorising about free speech has mostly concentrated on the free part of the equation. It's a concept which has a very long history, of course. Two ideas from ancient Greek philosophy, parrhesia and isagoria, have had a significant influence, for instance. But the modern idea of free speech is closely tied up with the history and development of liberalism as a political philosophy. Most of the major landmarks in liberal thought have had something to say about freedom of speech. It's often seen as the bedrock for all other human rights. In arguing for why it's so important, and why the pros of liberal protections for free speech outweigh the cons, the debate centres around what exactly the word freedom should be taken to mean. A key idea here, which again is fundamental to liberalism more generally, is the harm principle. The idea that the freedom of the individual should be constrained only when it becomes the direct cause of harm to others. In the case of speech, this leads to the question of if, when and how words can do real damage in the world, a question for the philosophy of language as much as linguistics. This question focuses on language, but it treats it at rather an abstract level. And then, of course, there are the debates themselves about free speech. Stanley Fish once argued that free speech doesn't actually exist. It was, he said, just a rhetoric. People use the term as a tool in their arguments about politics and society in the way they use terms such as political correctness, cancel culture, or fake news. There's no stable relationship between the term and a concrete phenomenon out there in the world. There are competing discourses of free speech, but these discourses are pretty much a separate phenomenon in their own right. And while they may be to do with language, the focus for analysis here is speech about free speech. Which brings us back to the original question. Isn't there anything productive to say about the speech itself in freedom of speech? There are a number of things that sociolinguistics could usefully offer for the topic of free speech. Firstly, there's the understanding of how meaning is made, that it's something created through interaction. It's a product of people, context and history. Then there's the fact that we're always regulating our speech in response to our understanding of the context in which we're speaking. We choose what we say and how we say it according to what we're trying to achieve in specific circumstances, and in response to the norms and expectations imposed on us by those circumstances. But we do all this within the constraints that come with our own individual access to sociolinguistic resources, the language we speak, the accent and dialect we speak with, our knowledge of jargons, genres, and all the other things which make up real-world speech. And this access is unequally distributed throughout society. Not everyone has access to the same prestige accent or variety, or is fluent in the registers that are required in different walks of life. All these things have an effect on how free people are to communicate their thoughts and opinions in the real-life contexts in which they find themselves, and they would thus make for a good starting point for a better understanding of the phenomenon rather than the rhetoric of free speech.